Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Linode, Zapier, and Collide. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
Well, I'm doing fine, but you I think, have beat yourself up again by doing that big photo shoot with the iPhone Pro, the iPhone 11 Pro.
Yeah, so basically I've discovered and I've sort of accepted that my summer now starts in June and ends in mid-October. So
I was going to say ends in January.
Oh my God! Why do you hate me, John?
I don't, but I feel like we're going to get like 2 weeks off, and then things are going to get crazy again.
Not crazy. Why crazy? I'm gonna take it easy. I mean, we've got stuff coming. We got stuff coming, but we can. Please, we need to take it. I beg you. We gotta take it easy.
Yeah, no, we both do. I think. Well, you know what? We had a really good discussion last week about Catalyst. And, you know, as much as we have figured out about Catalyst through this process, neither of us are doing development of Catalyst apps. And so we thought today we would have someone on the show to follow up on a couple of the topics that we talked about last week. And that is James Thomson, the maker of PCalc. Hey, James.
Hey, nice to be back on the show, and I completely sympathize with the starting in June and not finishing until now. Yeah. Welcome to our world.
Yes.
Yeah, and this year was just like so insane too, because the dates just fell all over the map. And when I heard that Catalina was going to be sometime in October, I just groaned because I had these images of not having my Catalina review done until Halloween. But fortunately, that has already happened. We've got Catalina, and now we have a whole crop of Catalyst apps, including Dice that you have on the Mac App Store. And what I wanted to talk to you about in particular is a couple of things. I guess, first of all, there are a lot of limitations with Catalyst. And I know as someone who's not myself developing a Catalyst app, it's sometimes hard to know when I'm looking at an app whether what I'm seeing is a limitation of Catalyst or a limitation of the software that was created. And one of the things that comes to mind in particular is like access to various hardware components in a Mac. For instance, the camera. As I understand it, the camera is not available through Catalyst. Are there other things like that you've run across that are hard to deal with just because there's no hooks into those things?
I mean, from the point of view of trying to write a Mac app, one of the basic things that you can't access is the state of the keyboard. So you can tell when somebody presses a key, but you can't tell if they've held down a key but not yet released it. Or if they're holding down like the shift key or the option key or things like that. And that's been a limitation on iOS for ages. But I kind of assumed that would go away with Catalyst, because if you're trying to write, say you're trying to bring a game across or something and you want to add keyboard controls, because keyboard is something that people tend to expect a real Mac app will support well, and you just can't do it. So, there's a lot of things that, you can't do it, but you can kind of do it if you start delving into the AppKit layers underneath.
Right. And I guess that kind of leads in a little bit into what and kind of a bigger topic that I wanted to talk to you about, which is, looking at the various apps I've seen so far, it feels like there are a few things that are driving some of the apps being a little rough around the edges when they were first released. One of those is just plain time, because people didn't know when Catalina was coming out, and it came out early in the month, and Catalyst was very buggy. It still is buggy, but was very buggy until very close to the end.
Some might say a bit after the end.
Yeah, yes. Exactly. I mean, there are still bugs that continue today that need to be cleaned up, but there's also design issues and technical issues, limitations, like you said, with the keyboard, limitations and just having to deal with the bugs. But then there are also design aspects, I think, in terms of some iOS developers not having either the time or thinking through how an app translates to the Mac, moving tab bars to a sidebar or creating keyboard shortcuts or utilizing the menu system, that sort of thing. I mean, what's kind of the combination in your view as to which of those things are driving it? And is there anything else that's kind of pushing the issues with some of the Catalyst apps?
I mean, I think it's a combination of all of the above. I mean, everything has been coming in really hot this year. It's like, and for a developer, if they have an iOS app, their primary focus was probably on making sure that worked properly with iOS 13 and all that sort of thing. And so they're trying to do that and deal with problems there. Catalyst and Catalina and Xcode have been very rough right up until the end. And yeah, I mean, some of it is possibly down to people not having, like, say, the design experience with macOS, and that is something that they have to learn along the way. But yeah, I mean, there's just so many factors, and I think it's a case of that we got any apps that are in a reasonable state on day one is quite amazing. And everyone I spoke to who was working away on Catalyst apps, I mean, there was a lot of exchanging of notes with people along the lines of, is this how it's supposed to work, or is it broken? And, oh, I found a workaround to do this, and so on. So there's been, a good bit of exchanging information, but there's a lot of times that people have just been coming up against really serious problems, and that's delayed their apps. And also we like got the submit your apps on the Friday, and they launched the OS on the Monday.
Right. Yeah, no, it was pretty crazy. And there, of course, exchanging notes was absolutely necessary because there's virtually no documentation as well.
Yeah, and that I want to state up front that I've enjoyed doing stuff with Catalyst, and I like it, and I think it's got an interesting future, or I hope it's got an interesting future. So any criticisms I have on it should be taken, from the perspective of somebody who shipped an app who actually likes it.
Right. Well, and likewise, I mean, my Catalina review, I am optimistic about Catalyst. I'm very encouraged by Catalyst, but you can see that there's an awful lot of pain points there for developers. And to me, that's, it's growing pains. It's very much a 1.0, or really still a beta in itself. And it's just something that I really hope Apple iterates on quickly and doesn't wait until WWDC 2020 to give us, new tools to use.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the main thought I think developers are having at the moment is like, how committed is Apple to this? The complete lack of documentation over the summer was a sort of, I hope, not a worrying sign of their, I don't want to say disinterest, because they've put a lot of effort into it, but it for something that's so I think critical for at least the short term of the Mac and iOS. I expected kind of more obvious signs, but because everything has seemed like, with the 13.0, 13.1 business and all of that, it could just be that everybody, everything has been on fire for the entire summer, and we should be glad that we have anything at all.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Linode. With Linode, you can instantly deploy and manage an SSD server in the Linode cloud. And you can get a server running in just seconds with your choice of Linux distro, resources, and node location. Linode serves their customers with the help of 10 data centers around the world, and they're about to add even more. Mumbai, India, and Toronto, Canada will both have data centers before 2020. Linode features native SSD storage, a 40 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors, meaning you're able to serve your customers even faster than ever before. And so you don't have to stress about overspending, Linode has designed their pricing tiers to feature hourly billing with the added bonus of a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services, such as backups and node balancers. Linode has pricing options that suit everybody's needs. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for just $5 a month, and they offer high memory plans starting with 16 gigabytes of RAM. And Linode has a special offer just for listeners of this show. As a listener of App Stories, you can go to linode.com/appstories and use the promo code AppStories2019 to get $20 toward any Linode plan. That's a fantastic deal. On the 1 gigabyte of RAM plan, that's 4 free months. And with a 7-day money-back guarantee, you have nothing to lose. Give Linode a try today. That's linode.com/appstories and the promo code appstories2019 to learn more, sign up, and make the most of that $20 credit. Our thanks to Linode for their support of App Stories.
I'm curious to know, James, because you've been playing around with what used to be known as Marzipan, essentially a year before Catalyst came out and was official. How different is the Catalyst development from what you've been able to sort of reverse engineer with Marzipan and the tool that Steve John-Smith made last year?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say I didn't do much reverse engineering. It was mostly Steve, but he showed me the way to sort of get stuff built. I know there's a lot of similarities in that a lot of the older APIs are not present in Catalyst, so that early work gave me the heads up of I better make sure that I've moved on to, like the new WebKit APIs and things like that. And things have been more fleshed out since then. So there's a lot more of the core stuff is working. And, things like the multiple window support is a really big thing that comes over with the scene stuff from iPad OS. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening, and they've had to integrate all the changes that were happening with iOS 13 into into Catalyst as well. But what's missing for me is, and what I expected, was the ability for them to provide like Mac-like user interface elements and more either mapping stuff over or creating new ones that we could use to make the interface more Mac-like. And at this point, we're kind of there's not really much of that's happened. There's stuff like the toolbars and the sidebars and things, but, not like making controls, just, basic buttons and pop-up menus and things like people expect on the Mac. And if you look at something like the Podcasts app, it does have those things. And it's clear that they had to roll their own. And the podcast app does other things as well with, special Apple-only entitlements, which are not available to us. Like all iPad apps get scaled down to 77% to make them closer to the kind of metrics of what you would see on a Mac screen. But that can cause some problems, and the podcast app turns that off. And so everything is 100%, but that's not available to us.
Yeah, some of this is really curious to me too. Things like checkboxes, things that are very basic that have a very clear analog on iOS. On iOS, it's switches, and when you see a switch on the Mac, it doesn't look quite right. Although I did notice that I think it was just a couple of days ago, the HIG was updated to include switches on the Mac. So
they did add a switch control that looks like the iOS switch. And it's like, that's great, but that's the wrong way around. I want all the Mac controls in Catalyst.
Right, exactly. Although maybe where Apple's headed is to meet in the middle somewhere and have both. But I would like to see checkboxes available in Catalyst too.
Yeah, I mean, I think meeting in the middle is a sort of an interesting way of looking at how to design for Catalyst, because I think the best apps are kind of trying, especially ones that are running on iOS and on the Mac, the best way to do it is to kind of try and find that middle ground between the two systems. And, what works on one, like a straight iOS app, I don't think works well at all as a Catalyst app. If you just literally just hit compile and run it, there's a lot of work to be done. But if you're trying to maintain this and have an iOS app as well, then if you write something that's too Mac-like, then your iOS app is going to feel a bit weird.
Yeah, that's true. And I've noticed some apps have done things like, flattened out the UI table view structure a little bit on the Catalyst app, which I think feels and works better on the Mac. I'm thinking about Lear in particular, the RSS reader, which is 2-pane on iOS, but 3 panes on Catalyst, which I think works really well on that platform. And it's that kind of thing where spreading out the hierarchy of the view structure works a little better, I think, on the Mac than having to drill through a lot of different layers.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were doing this properly, I mean, if you look at it, if you write something for the iPhone and the iPad, you'll have different user interfaces. You'll arrange things differently. You might use tables in one and popovers in the other. There really needs to be a sort of third way, so you can say, well, if I'm running on a Mac, then I want to lay out my UI in another different way. And there are ways to do that, but it would be nice to have the operating system support, especially if we're going to move down towards universal binaries at some point, presumably in the next 2 years.
Yeah, and that's something I wanted to talk to you about a little bit too, because it strikes me that there are a lot of technical limitations with Catalyst, but the fact that there's no test flight and there's no universal binaries yet makes it pretty hard from a business standpoint for developers to, one, get these apps out for testing to users or to promote them with press and things like that, but also not having universal binaries, they have to be sold as separate apps, and that just doesn't necessarily work with everybody's business model.
Well, I mean, there's two stages to that, because like with TV OS apps, you can kind of flag them and you can associate them with an iOS app, so that if you buy one, you get the other. And they're different apps, but they're sort of one SKU on the store, as it were.
Right.
So you could. I don't see any reason why they couldn't have done that even before they moved towards a universal binary that's like literally one app that runs on all the places. But presumably they had some good reason for it. But yeah, also the lack of test flight for the Mac. It's been painful for years just as a regular AppKit Mac developer to do this stuff. But when you're effectively, shipping an iOS app, the lack of support for it is very noticeable. And yeah, it's like I've been putting builds in a Dropbox and emailing people and things like that. And it's how we used to do it, before test flight came along. And it's just another sign of how much are they investing in this, and I think we will see this by this time next year. If things haven't changed at all and we're at WWDC and then they start announcing new things, it's like, no, I want to see stuff as the minor OS releases are coming. I want to see new APIs and new features.
Yeah, I got a lot of Dropbox links as I was working on my Catalina review, and it was, it's interesting because I deal with that all the time, just dealing with reviewing Mac apps, but iOS developers aren't used to that process, and I think it caught a lot of people off guard, and I had some apps, people had a hard time signing them properly so that they would work on my system. And then it was, how do you get it to someone? And is it small enough to attach to an email? Can you send me a Dropbox link? It just becomes a logistical problem for the developers dealing with everybody in the system.
Yeah, and then I would forget to send out links to certain people, and it's like, I've got a small mailing list, and it's like, oh, but I was supposed to give so and so a copy, and it's just another layer of things to manage, and
right on both ends.
And I wonder if the only point we're going to get this is when we do have universal binaries, and it's kind of happens for free or something,
right?
But use Catalyst and port the test flight app over to the Mac. That just, I mean, it's just a checkbox, isn't it?
Right.
So, James, I wanted to ask you, what is your current approach to SwiftUI? Is there any chance you're going to use any of that somewhere, perhaps in a specific screen of PCalc or Dice?
So I think my approach to SwiftUI, other than sort of hiding from it for now, I think what I'm going to do first, and this was my plan for the summer, I had this big list of things that I was going to do, and it was one of the ones that fell off the list, is rewrite the Watch app using SwiftUI, because it seems that is because WatchKit is quite restrictive in the things that it lets you do, so SwiftUI is in some senses, even though it's it's limited compared to UIKit and AppKit in some ways. Compared to WatchKit, it's more fully featured. So as a small project, the Watch app is fairly self-contained. So rewrite that in SwiftUI and get a feel for how stuff is working before I start scaling that to maybe other platforms. But, I've got 10 years of code that I've written in UIKit. And yeah, I've got some Swift in there. It's mostly Objective-C because it was written back in the days before Swift. And I've written some things like the tip jar and like the icon picker and stuff is in Swift. And it's little self-contained things like that are a good candidate for doing in SwiftUI at the moment and just seeing how it works. But if you do anything in SwiftUI, you're currently limited to running it on current platforms. So it won't work on like iOS 12 or anything like that. So it's hard to deploy as a general thing unless you're willing to make your system requirements just the latest OS.
Yeah, it's going to be a while, I guess, then before that really trickles out, especially to established apps. I guess people starting fresh might dive a little deeper, but not having backwards compatibility is kind of a tough position to be in at this point.
Yeah, and it's quite new and it's changing. And with like how Swift went itself in the first few years, I can imagine there's going to be a lot of source breaking changes just as it evolves and they figure out the best way to do things. So, part of me is sort of thinking, well, maybe I'll wait a year and see how things are. But I think the Watch app, it would be my little test app to get started on that stuff. And the question is, what is, if you want to write an app that's across all the platforms, do you use SwiftUI or do you use Catalyst? And today, I think Catalyst, especially if you've got an existing iOS source base, a UIKit source base. But if you've got nothing at all, maybe SwiftUI is the right thing to do. But even then, it's a difficult decision.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. James, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at James Thomson. That's THOMSON. And you can find PCalc and Dice by PCalc at PCalc.com.
Yeah, there's some great Panda pins available there too, so go check it out. Those are fun pins. I like them a lot. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Zapier. Growing a business is hard, especially if you're spending hours every day moving data from emails to spreadsheets or to wherever else. Wouldn't it be easier if all these things just worked together without you having to lift a finger? Zapier is the easiest way to automate your work. It connects all of your business software and handles work for you so you can focus on the things that matter the most. You don't need to waste time anymore on tasks that could be automated because Zapier is built to do just that. If you're in sales, Zapier lets you instantly engage with leads and send them to a CRM or spreadsheet and then notify your team so that everybody can act as fast as possible on every opportunity. But whatever your business, you can build the exact solution that suits your needs in just minutes without writing a single line of code or asking a developer for help. And with the support of more than 1,500 business applications, it's no wonder that 4.5 million people are saving 40 hours a month using Zapier. We use Zapier at MacStories to do things like automate a lot of our workflows for assigning projects and assigning stories to each of our writers, and for putting out our newsletter that we do every week for Club Mac Stories. It saves us a lot of time and lets us focus on the writing instead of the administration. Right now, through November, try Zapier free by going to zapier.com/appstories. That's zapier.com/appstories for your free 14-day trial. Go there now, check it out. It'll save you a ton of time. Again, that's zapier.com/appstories to check it out. Our thanks to Zapier for their support of the show. All right, Federico, as we said at the top, you just recently published your big iPhone Pro review with all the pictures of Rome, and they are absolutely beautiful pictures. Anyone who hasn't seen them yet should definitely go check them out. I loved it because I've been to Rome a couple of times, and you hit all of my favorite spots in the city. And you did it over the course of a couple of days, both going out at night to test things like night mode and during the day to see how the two compared and that sort of thing. And I wanted to, I guess, get a little bit of a behind the scenes from you, because I wanted to, I guess, understand better how you planned this story. Because did you pick the locations because you thought they would be particularly good for a particular photograph, or because they just show off Rome really particularly well? I mean, what kind of went into the planning of your two outings for day and night photos?
Well, first of all, I think it's interesting that you're calling it an iPhone review, because I didn't really approach it as such. I don't consider it to be a proper iPhone review. But I've seen you're not the first person to say this is the most insightful review I've seen of the iPhone 11 Pro, and that is fascinating because I really didn't set out to work on a proper review. In that I'm essentially a month late compared to other iPhone reviews that came out in September, and I thought, and here was my approach to answer your question. My thought was, this is something that I wanted to do for a couple of years. It's been in the back of my mind since the iPhone 10, I guess. But I never, somehow the circumstances, I never really got around to actually do it. So my idea was, I wanted to offer, considering that I was late, I couldn't, I just didn't see the benefit in just doing yet another iPhone 11 and 11 Pro review that would mention and exclusively focus on the display and the battery and the benchmarks. We've all seen those reviews, talking about the cases and all the usual stuff that you would see in a standard review. So I thought, what's the best way for me to offer a unique story that nobody else could do right now, that will truly show off the most important features of the iPhone 11 Pro in a way that doesn't require a lot of reading, that can be not necessarily too technical, but that can be enjoyed by all kinds of readers, and what is something that could be, maybe it could become something repeatable next year, in 2 years, something that could sort of become a new tradition for me. And I realized, I'm lucky enough to be able to live in Rome and more broadly speaking, in Italy. There's plenty of amazing, beautiful, stunning places to take pictures of here in Rome. And the most important feature of the iPhone 11 Pro is the new camera. And specifically, there's a night mode and there's an ultra-wide lens. And so as I was talking about my plans for covering the iPhone and the iPhone 11 Pro after getting my review units, I was talking about it with Sylvia, and I had this idea, what if I don't do a traditional review, but instead I do a photo tour of Rome, both at night and during the day. So my idea was to create something that could be approachable by my mom, by my friends, by all kinds of people, that could be visual, that could truly show off the photographic capabilities of the new iPhones, but that could also become something uniquely me, like something that only I could do.
Sure.
Because other English websites, they're based out of Silicon Valley. They don't live in Rome. So only I could reach my audience with this kind of content. So that was my approach.
Yeah, I think I call it a review because to me, the most remarkable thing about the iPhone 11 is the camera. I mean, it's the camera and it's the battery life, right? Those are the two things that I think most people will notice day in and day out. And you obviously went all in on the camera. And I think that that's the kind of thing that people can really relate to. And you covered the battery too, because you were out shooting photographs all day long and gave some impressions about how the battery held up during that process. Tell me what it was like a little bit going out and actually doing the shooting. I mean, because the camera app has changed a little bit in terms of the controls and how it works and that sort of thing. How did it go? Was it fiddly? Was it easy? I mean, what's your impression of the process of actually doing the shooting?
Sure. So first of all, you asked about how I planned my spots, my locations, and how the sort of the both trips happened. So I must say that even though I live in Rome, I am not super practical of navigating the center of Rome. Especially at night. There's a lot. You've been in Rome, you know how we don't do the best job at directions and indications and road signs, whether they are obscured by trees or just removed for some reason. It can be quite tricky. And so I knew that I needed to seek the help of two of my friends. They are native to Rome, born and raised. And I knew that I needed to have a guide myself, and so what we did was we planned a nice dinner out. So Silvia and me and this other couple, and we had a very tasty traditional Roman dinner. There's a picture of the pasta, the typical Roman pasta in the story, and then after dinner So my idea was I want to split the story in two. I want to offer the night mode photos and I want to offer the daytime photos. And I knew that I wanted to photograph Rome at night, ideally kind of late, so that I could make sure that as few people as possible would be around. And so I basically planned my spots with this friend of mine, and he put together an itinerary that would make sense insofar as we would drive and start at the Colosseum, and from there basically follow a path where at each spot we could park the car and walk for a couple of minutes, take a few pictures, go back to the car and move on to the next location. And the path was arranged so that we could get it done in 3 hours and follow essentially a path that would lead us back home. And that was possible because he knows how to navigate Rome. And so we started at the Colosseum and we made a list of all the locations, keeping in mind that I wanted to save some for a future story. So I could have done a lot more. There's a lot more that I could have done.
Sure.
But as I mentioned, I want this to become a thing. And so I didn't want to do it all, at once for the first time. So the itinerary was made possible by my friend who really helped me. And the daytime photos I followed, those are the locations that I know more a little better myself, even though I could have done a better job at optimizing because we really walked a lot that day, probably a little too much. I could have optimized the itinerary a little more, but then again, I'm not an expert of the center of Rome, so I'll try to do better next year. The camera. I love the new camera UI. I exclusively used the Apple camera app to take these pictures. I didn't use any third-party app. I didn't use Halide or Filmic or what's it called? Spark Camera, all these other third-party apps I did not use. I wanted to replicate the average experience of a new iPhone 11 Pro owner who just wants to take some pictures and use the default pre-installed Apple camera app. The new UI, I like it for two main reasons. It is super easy to switch between lenses. Apple has on the iPhone 11 Pro, there's 3 buttons at the bottom of the viewfinder that let you switch between the ultra wide, the wide angle, and the telephoto camera. Couldn't be any easier. You could also tap and hold those buttons to open the zoom wheel that allows you to switch between different zoom levels for the different lenses. And the second reason why I like it is that you can now swipe up on the viewfinder to reveal an additional set of controls at the bottom of the screen, and you can do it all with your thumb if you're holding the iPhone in portrait orientation. So that's where you'll find controls for night mode or the format or the timer, all those features. And it's super easy to use with one hand. It's also very accessible if you're holding the iPhone in landscape orientation. And so with your left hand, maybe you're holding the phone, and with your right index finger, you're using the different controls. I find it very intuitive, very easy. And I should also add how I never use the flash, of course, because you really shouldn't use the flash.
Right.
And the night mode pictures were usually, most of them were taken with the night mode max option. So the maximum amount of exposure time for night mode. And a fun fact that I've been able to confirm with a few friends, the pictures where I do the comparisons in the story between night mode disabled and night mode enabled. So I've been told that the ones where night mode is disabled, most of them, they have deep fusion going on. So these pictures were taken with the first beta of iOS 13.2. So 13.2 beta 1. And when night mode is disabled, deep fusion kicks in. And most of them, I've been told, they do have deep fusion. So there's no, of course, for the end user, there's no visible setting or label or option that tells you that deep fusion is enabled. But so I've been told. And that's why I wanted to publish these pictures at full resolution, completely unedited, the original shots on the website, because you can zoom in, you can download them, you can do whatever you want, you can open them in a new browser tab, you can zoom in on the iPhone, you can do whatever you want, but you can zoom in and you can see all the details. And some of them, I can see what Apple means by deep fusion. You get this extra crisp and incredibly fine details, even if you zoom in all the way into a picture, which is really remarkable, I think.
Yeah, and I think the scenes that you picked to photograph really lent themselves well to deep fusion, because a lot of the monuments and things like that were lit for at night, and
yes.
that probably gave it enough light in order for deep fusion to kick in. Which my understanding is that if it's really, really dark, it doesn't kick in. Then it's just pure night mode, right? So
right.
They look really terrific. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about night mode, and I guess two different things. One is you said that you use night mode max most of the time, and so you were going into tapping the night mode indicator and then just cranking that up to maximum because you were using a tripod. Is that right?
Yeah, that's using the tripod allows you to you can access the max setting even if the iPhone is handheld, but with the tripod you tend to get like a longer exposure time, because the iPhone is held steady by the tripod. There's no movement, even if your hands are a little shaky or you're just moving it's only natural to move your iPhone a little when you're taking a picture. But with a tripod, if the iPhone is completely still and you wait a few seconds, you will be able to go up to 10, 12, 15. I've seen 30 seconds. I wasn't able to get 30 seconds in Rome because it's not completely dark, but some pictures were taken with 10 or 12 seconds of night mode.
Yeah, it's amazing when you don't even realize it, but just the fact that you're breathing moves the camera just enough to really reduce what that maximum can be. So a tripod does come in handy if you want to go full in on the night mode. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Collide. Collide is a new user-focused security Slack app. It messages employees when their security systems aren't as secure as they should be on their Mac, Windows, or Linux device. So, with the Collide app, if a user has a device that isn't complying with security best practices, they'll be notified with a clear instruction on how to fix it and what's gone wrong. They can even confirm in real time that it's all sorted out once they follow those steps with an interactive button inside of Slack. Collide was designed with user privacy in mind. This means a bunch of great things, like the fact that users know what data is collected about their device, plus information on who can see the data and the option to look at the full source code of the agent that is running on the device. Collide is already used by hundreds of fast-growing companies who want to level up their device security without locking down their devices. Try Collide's new product for free for 30 days for your whole team. Just go to collide.com. That's KOLIDE.com. Our thanks to Collide for their support of App Stories. I guess the other thing I wanted to ask you about night mode is how did you do any of the photographs just kind of comparing what it was like using handheld night mode versus the tripod?
I'm trying to think about it. I did a couple, but they were not that interesting. I thought that it was gonna be more obvious where the difference would be, but it really wasn't. And so I think I've done a couple of. I tried to do a couple of those at the Colosseum, but really, I'm guessing that the main reason why it was not that obvious is that none of the monuments were completely dark, and so there was still a lot of light, and that light made night mode optional but not necessary, and you can get an idea of and because of that, the comparison between handheld night mode and tripod night mode was not that impressive. So I only included the tripod ones because they were the best ones, and they were the ones taken with the max setting and the longer capture time. But you can see a difference. To give you some context, on page 2, I believe, there's a shot of the altar of the fatherland that's in Piazza Venezia. It's this big monument it's got a bunch of different architectural elements, like a huge stairway, and there's a colonnade at the top of the monument. There's a bunch of statues. It was built in honor of the first king of a unified Italy. And you can see with the dark mode, with the night mode disabled, you can see the monument, but it's relatively dark.
Right.
With night mode on, what it does is it lights up the monument so that you can still tell that it's a shot taken at night, but the entire thing is lit up. So you can see all of the details of the stone and the marble and the stairways. This is on page 2 of the story. So I liked this approach because it was not the kind of night mode photo that I've seen in a bunch of reviews of like some super boring testing environment where like, here's my couch in the dark and here's my couch with night mode enabled. That's not very exciting. and I wanted to show off what it would do in practice, because this is what people do in practice. People go out, they travel, they go to a beautiful city, they want to take a picture of a beautiful monument or the food they're eating or a beautiful view. And so that's sort of I try to live like a tourist for 2 days in my own city, and that was sort of the approach that I took for this story.
Yeah, that one shot is a very good example, because when you have night mode off, it's still a good picture, and you can see the parts of it are lit, especially in the center of the altar of the fatherland. But when you use the night mode, it kind of pulls forward more of the colonnade and more of the statues that are along the edges of the picture, and the grass and the flowers that are in front of it, that sort of thing. But the sky is still dark, so you know that it's nighttime, and you can kind of see like traffic lights off to the sides and things. So you know it's still nighttime, but you've got a much more evenly lit and interesting photo when you've got the night mode going on there.
Right.
Anything else about the experience you think people should know about, Federico?
There's a Apple Maps collection on the last page of the story, page 4. This is a new feature of iOS 13. You can create a collection of places and you can share that collection with other people. So there's a link that you can tap and it'll open in the Maps app, and it contains all of the locations that I've mentioned or shown off in the story, which is very useful if you're planning a trip to Rome and you want to save some locations for visiting yourself. The story is split across 4 pages, not because I really wanted those page views, but because the total amount of pictures, there's 50 full res original shots, and the total amount of pictures is 400 megabytes. And I was afraid that doing a single page and requiring web browsers to load a single page with 400 megabytes worth of assets would have been a little too much. So I split it across 4 pages. And lastly, I would mention that I really tried my best to reference a few basic historical details of each location. So there's Wikipedia links. There's a few details about when they were built, and that's especially for the Roman Empire ruins, and the Colosseum and the Imperial Fora, all of that stuff. I've tried to include as many references as possible. So it also acts as sort of this story. I see it as like a sort of like a mini guide to some parts of Rome. But there's a lot more. There's a lot more that I want to do, and hopefully we'll do it again next year. It depends on what the cameras are like next year, what kind of story I wanted to tell. But I strongly felt that the combination of night mode and ultra wide was perfect to capture the essence and the beauty of Rome. There's more that I want to do, but it really comes down to what next year's iPhone cameras are like.
Yeah, I can think of some locations that I would love to see you take pictures of too, but I think you did a really great job of capturing the highlights of Rome. And if anybody is visiting Rome for a vacation, this, it may be all about the camera, but yeah, the map is there and all the locations are there and there's information about each of these sites. And I would recommend all of them because I've been to all these sites and I absolutely love them and it made me excited because it made me look forward to coming back to Rome sometime and seeing them all again because it's such a beautiful city.
Yeah, you should.
I will indeed. All right. Well, thanks to our 3 sponsors for this episode. That's Linode, Zapier, and Collide. And also thanks to James Thomson, the maker of PCalc. You can find his app over at PCalc.com. That's both PCalc on the Mac, on the Apple TV, on iOS, everything, plus Dice. It's all there, and those Panda pins. And you can find me and Federico, of course, over at macstories.net. Federico is on Instagram and Twitter. He's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.